The desert air hung heavy around the military base as the phone rang in the small, sparsely furnished room. Major Thomas Wright reached for it, his dark fingers wrapping around the device as he balanced a stack of mission reports in his other hand. It had been 18 hours since he'd last slept, but the fatigue vanished the moment he saw the familiar number on the screen. "Hey, Mom," he said, his deep voice softening. The tension in his broad shoulders eased slightly at the sound of her warm laugh on the other end. "There's my boy," Elaine Wright responded. At 68, her voice still carried the musical quality that had lulled him to sleep throughout his childhood. "How's the weather over there?" Thomas glanced out the window at the endless stretch of sand. "Same as always. Hot enough to fry an egg on my helmet." He didn't mention the firefight from 3 days ago or the night operation scheduled for tomorrow. 15 years in special operations had taught him to keep those details locked away, even from the woman who raised him. "And you? Everything good back home?" he asked, settling onto his bunk. 5,000 miles away in Riverdale, his mother's small paws made him sit up straighter. "Oh, you know. Same old neighborhood troubles," Elaine said, her voice now careful, measured. "Those new folks across the street called the police on Mr. Wilson again for walking his dog too close to their yard." Thomas frowned. This wasn't the first concerning story he'd heard from her in recent weeks. "Mom, has anyone been giving you trouble? You'd tell me, right?" "Now don't you worry about me," she replied, though something in her tone made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "I've been dealing with nosy neighbors since before you were born." Thomas rose from the bunk and began pacing the small room. His commanding officer had noticed the pattern too, asking if everything was all right back home after Thomas had received 3 calls in 1 week. "What about those officers who followed you home from the grocery store? Did they come back?" Elaine sighed. "They drive by sometimes. Slow down when they pass the house. Nothing I can't handle." "That's harassment, Mom. You should file her." "I'm not looking to make waves, sweetheart. This is still a small town. People have long memories." Thomas ran a hand over his closely shaved head, frustration building. His mother had always been like this, steel wrapped in silk, facing down problems with quiet dignity rather than confrontation. But something felt different this time, a current of genuine worry beneath her casual tone. "Look, I've got some leave coming up. Maybe I should." A sharp noise cut through the line, a heavy pounding that echoed through the phone. "Mom, what's that sound?" "There's someone at the door," Elaine said, her voice suddenly tight. Hold on, there are police cars outside." Thomas gripped the phone harder. "Don't open it. Not until they identify themselves properly." "They're shining lights through the windows," she whispered. The pounding came again, louder, followed by muffled shouting. "They're saying something about a complaint." "Keep me on the line," Thomas ordered, his special forces training kicking in. "Ask to see a warrant through the window. Don't." "I think they're going around back," Elaine said, her breath quickening. "There's someone at the kitchen door now." Thomas was already moving toward his commander's office, his mind racing through protocols for emergency leave. "Mom, go to the safe room like we discussed. Call 911 on the landline." "I don't want to make this worse," she said. There was the sound of movement, then her voice became clearer as if she pressed the phone closer. "They're saying they got a call about an intruder. That's ridiculous. I've lived here for 40 years. The sound of glass breaking exploded through the speaker. "They're coming in the back." The fear in his mother's voice turned Thomas's blood cold. "I need to show them my ID. They think I'm breaking into my own home." "Mom, don't make any sudden movements," Thomas said, fighting to keep his voice calm while his heart hammered against his ribs. "Tell them you're on the phone with your son. Tell them." A shout. A scream. 2 sharp cracks that Thomas recognized instantly as gunfire. Then silence. "Mom." His voice echoed in the empty room. "Mom." The line remained connected, but all he could hear was distant shouting and radio static. Thomas stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, then moved with the deadly precision that had made him one of the military's most effective operators. Within minutes, he was standing in his commander's office, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Sir, I need emergency leave. My mother's been shot." 3 days before Thomas received that devastating call, Elaine Wright had been enjoying the cool morning air in her garden. The roses she'd planted 30 years ago were blooming late this season, their deep red petals unfurling toward the sun. She wore her favorite gardening hat, the wide-brimmed one her late husband had given her for their anniversary, and hummed softly as she pruned the bushes. The new family across the street had moved in just 2 months ago. Elaine had baked them a sweet potato pie as a welcome gift, but they'd barely opened the door to accept it. Since then, she'd noticed them watching whenever she collected her mail or worked in her yard. She tried not to let it bother her. After 40 years in this neighborhood, she'd seen families come and go. Just need time to settle in, she told herself as she snipped a dead branch. The police car rolled down the street slowly, like a shark circling in shallow water. Elaine straightened her back, feeling the familiar ache between her shoulder blades. This was the 3rd time this week a patrol car had cruised by. She kept her eyes on her roses, her movements deliberate and calm. The car stopped. 2 officers stepped out, one older with a belly hanging over his belt, the other young with closely cropped hair and nervous eyes. Their hands rested near their holsters. "Ma'am," the older one called out, "we got a call about a suspicious person in this area." Elaine set down her pruning shears carefully on the garden bench. "Good morning, officers. I'm just tending to my garden." The younger officer stepped onto her property, his gaze darting around as if expecting danger to leap from behind her rose bushes. "Do you live here?" A flash of irritation crossed Elaine's face before she smoothed it away. "Yes, for 40 years now. My name is Elaine Wright. This is my home." "We'll need to see some ID," the older officer said, moving closer. Elaine gestured toward the house. "My purse is inside. I can go get it for you." "How do we know this is really your house?" The younger officer cut in, his voice sharp with suspicion. Elaine felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with her age. "You can ask any of the neighbors who've been here more than 2 months. Mrs. Henderson next door has been my friend for 30 years. The older officer looked toward the Henderson house, but the younger one stepped closer, his hand now resting more firmly on his weapon. "We've had reports of break-ins in this area. People pretending to be gardeners or repairmen." Elaine's patience thinned. "Young man, I'm 68 years old. Do I look like I'm breaking into houses?" Behind them, Elaine saw the new neighbors watching from their window, phones in hand. The sight made her reach for her own phone in her pocket. "I'm calling my son," she said, pulling out her cell phone. The younger officer's posture changed instantly. "Put down the weapon." "It's a phone," Elaine said clearly, holding it up. "I'm calling my son." "Drop it now." The younger officer drew his gun, his face flushed with adrenaline. "Officer Parker, take it easy," the older cop said, his tone cautious. "It's a phone," Elaine repeated, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She'd raised a son alone in a world that often feared him because of his skin color. She'd taught him to stay calm in the face of suspicion. Now she followed her own advice. The phone screen lit up as she pressed the power button. The younger officer saw the movement, the flash of light. 2 shots rang out. Elaine felt a strange pressure in her side, then heat, then pain that took her breath away. She fell backward among her roses, the thorns scratching her arms as she clutched her bleeding side. "Officer involved shooting," the older cop shouted into his radio. "We need an ambulance at 1423 Maple Street." The younger officer stood frozen, his gun still pointed, eyes wide with shock. She had something in her hand," he stammered. The older officer knelt beside Elaine, pressing his hands against her wound. "It's a den phone, Parker. It was always a phone." Elaine's vision blurred as neighbors spilled from their homes. Through the haze of pain, she saw Mrs. Henderson running toward her, face twisted in horror. The new neighbors stood on their lawn, recording everything with their phones. "My son," Elaine whispered, blood seeping between the officer's fingers. "Call my son." The world tilted and darkened around her. As the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, Elaine's last clear thought was of Thomas and how desperately she didn't want him to see her like this. Thomas stepped off the plane with nothing but a small backpack and the hollow feeling in his stomach that had been there since the call. 36 hours of travel, military transport, commercial flight, and finally a bus had left him disheveled and weary. His uniform was packed away. He wore only jeans and a plain black t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. The hospital stood like a fortress against the afternoon sky, all glass and concrete. Thomas paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. In war zones, he never hesitated. But here, knowing his mother lay wounded inside, his courage wavered. "Keep it together," he muttered to himself, squaring his shoulders before walking through the sliding doors. The reception area buzzed with the normal activity of a busy hospital, nurses hurrying between stations, visitors clutching coffee cups, the antiseptic smell that never quite covered the underlying scent of sickness and worry. Thomas approached the front desk, where a tired-looking woman typed rapidly on a computer. "I'm here to see Elaine Wright," he said. "I'm her son." The woman's fingers paused over the keyboard. Something flickered across her face, recognition, then unease. "Let me check on that for you," she said, reaching for the phone. She turned away slightly, speaking in low tones that Thomas couldn't quite catch. 5 minutes later, a hospital security guard appeared beside a man in an ill-fitting suit who introduced himself as Hospital Administration. His handshake was clammy, his smile thin. "Mr. Wright, we appreciate you coming all this way," the administrator said. "Unfortunately, there are some protocols in place regarding your mother's visitors." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. Protocols. Due to the ongoing investigation, the Riverdale Police Department has restricted access to Mrs. Wright's room. Only approved visitors are permitted at this time. The security guard shifted his weight, hand resting near the taser on his belt. Thomas noticed the movement but kept his eyes on the administrator. "She's my mother," Thomas said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm her only family." "I understand, but—" "No, I don't think you do." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out his military ID. "Major Thomas Wright, United States Army. I've just flown in from overseas on emergency family leave. Now, I'd like to see my mother." The administrator glanced at the ID, then handed it back with an apologetic shrug. "Military status doesn't override police jurisdiction in a criminal investigation, Major Wright." "Criminal investigation?" Thomas repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "My mother was gardening in her own yard." According to the report, she was reaching for an unidentified object, and officers responded according to protocol. Thomas felt heat rising up his neck, but years of training kept his expression neutral. "Her phone. She was reaching for her phone to call me." A small crowd had gathered nearby, other visitors watching the exchange with curious eyes. The security guard stepped closer, his hand now resting more obviously on his taser. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice." Thomas hadn't realized he'd raised it. He took a measured breath, aware that losing control here wouldn't help his mother. "I want to speak to her doctor." "Dr. Patterson is unavailable," the administrator said quickly. "Perhaps you could come back tomorrow with proper clearance from the police department." As Thomas opened his mouth to respond, a nurse passing by slowed, making brief but deliberate eye contact with him before continuing down the hallway. There was something in her expression, recognition, maybe sympathy. "Fine," Thomas said finally. "Where do I get this clearance?" The administrator gave him directions to the police station, speaking with obvious relief now that Thomas appeared to be complying. As he turned to leave, Thomas noticed a police officer in uniform sitting in the waiting area, pretending to read a magazine but watching him over its pages. Outside the hospital, Thomas paused at the bottom of the steps, pulling out his phone. The nurse who had made eye contact with him had slipped a folded piece of paper into his hand as she passed. He opened it now. Room 342. Security camera blind spot in east stairwell. Shift change at 7 p.m. They're controlling her meds. Thomas looked back at the hospital, noting the exits, the security camera positions, the patrol pattern of the guards visible through the glass doors. His military training kicked in automatically, mapping the building in his mind. As he walked toward the rental car, he noticed a dark sedan pull away from the curb and follow at a discreet distance. They weren't even trying to be subtle. "All right then," he whispered to himself. "Let's play." The coffee shop on Main Street hadn't changed since Thomas was in high school. Same faded blue awning, same bell that jingled when he pushed open the door. He chose a corner table with his back to the wall, a habit from years in the field. Through the window, he could see the sedan that had followed him from the hospital now parked across the street, two men inside pretending not to watch him. The door jingled again. A woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun walked in, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Thomas. Her face softened with recognition as she approached. "I heard you were back in town," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Lisa," Thomas nodded, relief washing over him at seeing his childhood friend. "Thanks for coming." Lisa Chen had grown up 3 houses down from the Wrights. Now she wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase that she placed carefully on the table between them. "How is she?" Lisa asked, her voice dropping. "I don't know. They won't let me see her." Thomas's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "You're the first friendly face I've seen since I got back." Lisa glanced at the sedan parked outside, then back to Thomas. "I've been trying to get to your mom for days. The police have her room guarded. They're calling it protective custody, but it's more like house arrest." "What exactly happened?" "I've only heard bits and pieces." Lisa opened her briefcase and slid some papers across the table. "I've been gathering evidence. Officer Parker, the one who shot your mother, has a history. 3 excessive force complaints in the last year alone, all involving black residents, all buried by internal affairs." Thomas scanned the documents, his military training helping him absorb the key information quickly. And the older officer, "Reynolds, 20 years on the force. Generally decent record, but he's part of the system. He tried to help your mom after she was shot, but he's towing the department line now." Thomas set down the papers. "I need to see her, Lisa. That's why I brought this." She pulled out a folder with hospital letterhead. "I have a friend who works in medical records. This is your mother's chart. They've been keeping her sedated, supposedly for pain management, but the dosage is suspicious." Thomas read through the medical jargon, his expression darkening. They're buying time, keeping her quiet until they can build their story. Lisa nodded. "The official statement says she made a threatening movement toward the officers. There's bodycam footage, but the department is refusing to release it." The bell above the door jingled again. 3 men in workout clothes entered, taking seats at different tables. To a casual observer, they might look like ordinary gym-goers grabbing coffee after a workout. But Thomas noticed their watchful eyes, the careful way they positioned themselves around the room, the precise distance they maintained from each other. He gave a slight nod, which was returned almost imperceptibly. "Friends of yours?" Lisa asked quietly. "From work," Thomas replied. "I called in some favors." Lisa raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she pulled out her phone and showed him a news article. The new neighbors who called the police, the Millers, have been making noise in the local paper, claiming they've never felt safe since moving to the neighborhood. They've been interviewed 3 times already. "Creating a narrative," Thomas said. "Exactly." Lisa put her phone away. "There's something else. The property development company that's been buying up houses in your mom's neighborhood. Their CEO plays golf with the police chief every Sunday." Thomas connected the dots immediately. They want the land. Riverdale's growing. That neighborhood sits on prime real estate now. Lisa leaned forward. "Elderly residents on fixed incomes are being pressured to sell. Your mother refused 3 offers in the past year." Outside, a patrol car slowly cruised past the coffee shop. The men in the sedan straightened up. "You're being watched," Lisa stated the obvious. "Let them watch," Thomas replied. "Meanwhile, my friends will be watching them." One of the gym-goers stood up, stretching casually before walking out. The others remained, sipping their coffee with relaxed patience. "I need access to my mother's house," Thomas said, "and I need to see that bodycam footage." Lisa smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "I filed an emergency motion this morning for access to both. The hearing is tomorrow. The judge is sympathetic. His mother lives in the same neighborhood." Thomas felt the first flicker of hope since he'd returned. "Thank you, Lisa." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Your mom was there for me when my parents worked night shifts. She made sure I had dinner every evening for years." Her eyes hardened with determination. "We're going to fix this, Thomas. And some people are going to learn exactly who they're dealing with." The hospital's east stairwell was dimly lit and smelled of floor cleaner. Thomas checked his watch, 6:55 p.m. Shift change would begin in 5 minutes. He wore scrubs borrowed from Lisa's doctor friend, with a surgical mask covering the lower half of his face. The ID badge clipped to his pocket belonged to Dr. Raymond Wilson, who happened to share Thomas's height and build. Thomas had spent the afternoon memorizing the hospital layout from blueprints his team had somehow acquired. He knew exactly how many steps it would take to reach his mother's room from the stairwell 47. At precisely 7:00 p.m., a coded announcement came over the hospital pay system. Right on schedule, footsteps echoed as the security guard stationed at the third-floor exit headed downstairs for the shift handover. Thomas slipped through the door and walked with purposeful strides down the corridor. Medical staff moved around him, too busy with their own duties to pay much attention to another doctor. He kept his head slightly down, his posture relaxed but certain, projecting the confidence of someone who belonged. Room 342 had a police officer stationed outside, a young guy with red hair and freckles who looked barely old enough to carry a badge. Thomas approached with a clipboard he picked up from an empty nursing station. "Evening," Thomas said, his voice professionally clipped. "I need to check Mrs. Wright's vitals." The officer straightened. "I'll need to see authorization. This patient is under protective custody." Thomas flipped through papers on his clipboard. "Should be right here. Strange, it was signed by Captain Harris this morning." He patted his pockets. "Must have left it at the station. Look, I just need 2 minutes to check our monitors. Dr. Patterson will have my head if these readings aren't updated before his rounds." The name-dropping worked. The officer's posture relaxed slightly. 2 minutes. I'll need to be in the room." "Of course." The officer opened the door, and Thomas felt his heart constrict. His mother lay small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, tubes and wires connecting her to softly beeping machines. Her warm brown skin had taken on an ashen tone, her usually vibrant face slack with sedation. Thomas moved to the monitors, forcing himself to play the role while his mind raced with medical knowledge picked up from field operations. "Pulse rate stable," he said, writing on the clipboard. "Oxygen levels good." He glanced at the IV bag. "What pain medication is she receiving?" "I wouldn't know," the officer replied. "Medical stuff's not my department." Thomas noted the excessive dosage, confirming Lisa's suspicions. He moved closer to his mother, adjusting a sensor on her finger. As he leaned down, he whispered, "Mom, it's me. I'm here." Her eyelids fluttered, the briefest sign that somewhere under the sedation she heard him. "Everything looks stable," Thomas announced. "I'll update her chart at the station." The officer nodded, already looking bored. "Your 2 minutes are up, Doc." Thomas walked out, forcing himself not to look back. He'd seen what he needed to see. 20 minutes later, he was back in Lisa's car, parked 2 blocks from the hospital. "They're keeping her heavily sedated," he reported, anger threading through his controlled voice. "And there's a police guard outside her door." Lisa handed him a coffee. "Did you plant it?" Thomas nodded. "Under the bed frame. If your aide friend is as good as you say, we'll have eyes and ears in that room by morning." "He's the best," Lisa assured him. "What about the guard?" "Young. Inexperienced, just following orders." Thomas stared out the window. "He's not our problem." Lisa started the car. "I got a call while you were in there. Judge Watkins signed our emergency order. We can access your mother's house tomorrow morning." "Good. And the bodycam footage?" "That's trickier. The department is claiming technical difficulties." Lisa pulled into traffic. "But my contact in the records department says both officers' cameras were functioning perfectly that day." Thomas watched the hospital recede in the side mirror. "They're hiding something." "Definitely," Lisa agreed. "But they made a mistake today. The police chief gave a press conference, claiming your mother became combative when questioned. Said she'd been behaving erratically in the neighborhood for weeks." "That's ridiculous," Thomas said. "Mom wouldn't hurt a fly." "Exactly. And Mrs. Henderson from next door has 40 years of friendship that says otherwise." She's furious about the lies. Lisa smiled grimly. "She's organized a neighborhood meeting tonight. Turns out a lot of longtime residents are tired of being pushed around by this development company and their police friends." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Community support is good, but we need concrete evidence." "That's where your friends come in, right? The ones from the coffee shop." Thomas's phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, his expression unchanging despite the significance of what he read. "My team found something," he said quietly. "The backup server where police bodycam footage is automatically uploaded. They're sending the files now." Lisa gasped. "How did they?" She stopped herself. "Never mind. I don't want to know." "No," Thomas agreed. "You don't." The car turned onto a side street as Thomas downloaded the files to his secure tablet. Soon, the truth of what happened to his mother would be undeniable, and someone would have to answer for it. The mayor's office had the polished look of old money and power, dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and framed certificates covering nearly every inch of wall space. Thomas sat with perfect military posture, dressed in a crisp suit that revealed nothing of the recording devices hidden beneath it. Across the massive oak desk, Mayor Wilson adjusted his red tie nervously, while Police Chief Benson stood by the window, arms crossed over his barrel chest. "We appreciate you coming in today, Mr. Wright," the mayor said, his politician's smile not quite reaching his eyes. "This unfortunate situation has gotten out of hand, and we'd like to discuss a resolution." "I'm listening," Thomas replied, his face giving away nothing. The chief cleared his throat. "First, let me say how sorry we are about your mother. Officer Parker is a young officer who made a split-second decision in what he perceived to be a threatening situation." Thomas thought of the bodycam footage he'd watched last night, his mother clearly holding up her phone, clearly announcing what it was, the panic in Officer Parker's voice as he fired anyway. He kept his expression neutral. "The city is prepared to be generous," the mayor continued, sliding a folder across the desk. "Full coverage of your mother's medical expenses, a reasonable settlement figure, and we'll drop all pending charges." "Charges?" Thomas asked, his voice dangerously soft. The chief stepped forward. "Just a formality. Interfering with a police investigation, resisting arrest, nothing that would stick, obviously, which is why we're willing to clear the slate." Thomas left the folder untouched. "And in return?" "A standard non-disclosure agreement." The mayor tapped the folder. "You and your mother agree not to discuss the incident publicly. Everyone moves on." "Moving on sounds good," Thomas said. "My mother liked to move around her neighborhood freely, without being harassed by officers or shot while gardening." The chief's face reddened. "Now listen here." "No," Thomas cut him off. "You listen." He leaned forward slightly. "I've been very patient. I've played by your rules. I've watched as you kept my mother sedated to control her story. I've seen the evidence you tried to bury." The mayor and chief exchanged quick glances. "What evidence?" the mayor asked carefully. "The bodycam footage showing my mother clearly identifying herself and her phone. The property records showing how your biggest campaign donor has been buying up homes in my mother's neighborhood. The disciplinary records of Officer Parker, with 3 excessive force complaints that mysteriously disappeared." The room went silent except for the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. "You've been busy," the chief finally said, his tone icy. "You have no idea," Thomas replied. The mayor regained his composure first. "These allegations are concerning, if true. Perhaps we should involve our legal team in this discussion." "I'm not interested in more discussions," Thomas said, standing up. "I'm interested in justice for my mother and her neighborhood." The chief stepped closer, his hand instinctively moving toward where his service weapon would normally be. "You're making a mistake, son. You don't know who you're dealing with in this town." Thomas turned to face him fully. "No, Chief Benson. You don't know who you're dealing with." He held the man's gaze until the chief looked away first. "Let me be clear," Thomas continued, his voice low and steady. "Since returning to Riverdale, every conversation I've had has been recorded. Every meeting, every phone call, every threat from your officers following me around town." He pulled out his phone and played a brief audio clip, the chief's voice telling someone to keep that right woman quiet until this blows over. The color drained from both men's faces. "Military intelligence," Thomas explained. "It's what I do." "Now wait just a minute," the mayor sputtered. "You can't just record people without their knowledge. That's illegal. So is tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations." Thomas countered. "My team has documented it all." "Your team?" the chief asked, glancing toward the window as if he might see them lurking outside. 3 years later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow over the new community center as people gathered for the grand opening. Elaine Wright stood tall beside her son, a slight limp the only visible reminder of what had happened. Her gray hair was styled elegantly, and her smile radiated the same warmth it always had, despite everything. Thomas watched his mother cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, the crowd breaking into applause. The pride in his chest nearly overwhelmed him. After everything she'd endured, his mother had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a force for change. "The Wright Community Center is officially open," Elaine announced, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. People streamed inside to explore the new building, a modern structure with classrooms, meeting spaces, a computer lab, and offices for community advocacy. What had once been an abandoned warehouse was now a beacon of hope in Riverdale. Mrs. Henderson, Elaine's longtime neighbor, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I never thought I'd see the day," she told Thomas. "Your mother is something special." "Always has been," Thomas agreed, watching as Elaine showed a group of children the mural painted on the main hall, faces of community members past and present, including his father. Liza approached, professional as always in her tailored suit, though her smile was genuine. "The Department of Justice representatives are impressed," she said quietly. "The consent decree is working because of centers like this." The federal investigation Thomas had demanded had revealed patterns of discrimination throughout the Riverdale Police Department. The resulting consent decree had mandated comprehensive reforms, new training protocols, community oversight, body cameras with public access to footage, and regular reviews of officer conduct. "How's Officer Parker doing in the new training program?" Thomas asked. "Better than expected," Lisa replied. "Having your mother speak to the cadets about her experience, that changed perspectives. Some officers were resistant at first, but they're coming around." The former police chief had resigned in disgrace after the investigation, replaced by a woman committed to rebuilding trust with the community. Mayor Wilson had lost his re-election bid to a longtime community activist who now stood chatting with residents near the refreshment table. "Your friend's still in town?" Lisa asked, glancing around. Thomas shook his head. "Back to their regular duties. But they check in." His Delta Force teammates had returned to their posts after helping Thomas expose the corruption in Riverdale, but their impact remained. The training program they'd helped design for the police department was now being adopted by other cities facing similar issues. Across the room, Thomas spotted the property developer who'd tried to force residents out of their homes. The man looked uncomfortable in the community setting, but his presence was significant. After the scandal broke, his company had been forced to change tactics, offering fair prices and relocation assistance to those who wanted to sell, while helping others like Elaine renovate their homes to stay. "Mr. Wright?" A young reporter approached with a notepad. "Could I ask about what inspired the community center?" Thomas deferred to his mother, who joined them with a warm smile. "This center exists because people refuse to look away," Elaine explained. "When my son came home after I was shot, he could have sought revenge. Instead, he sought justice, not just for me, but for everyone in this neighborhood who'd been treated unfairly." The reporter scribbled notes. "And the police training program you're involved with, that's about healing," Elaine said simply. "Officers need to see the people they serve as neighbors, not threats. And communities need to see officers as protectors, not enemies. We're building that bridge, one conversation at a time." Thomas watched his mother with quiet admiration. Her forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was a strength few possessed. The officer who had shot her had personally apologized, a moment that had moved both of them to tears. Now he volunteered at the center on weekends, working with local teens. As the celebration continued around them, Thomas and Elaine stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The neighborhood spread before them, the same streets where she had raised him, where she had nearly lost her life, and where now something new was growing. "Your father would be proud," Elaine said, taking her son's hand. "Not just of what you did when you came home, but of what you chose not to do." Thomas nodded, understanding. His training had given him the skills to destroy those who had hurt his mother. Instead, he had channeled that power into rebuilding something broken. "I learned from the best," he told her, squeezing her hand gently. Together, they walked back into the community center that bore their name, A mother and son whose story had started in pain but was ending in purpose, their shared strength becoming a foundation on which others could build.